Well, hello there. This is Craig Hain, and this is a video for Chapter 9 of the book How and Why Homeschool Math Can Be Vastly Superior to Public School Math. And as I said, this is Craig Hain. You can check me out on craighain.com, my personal website, and I am the CEO of Triad Math and essentially the creator of the program I will be telling you about. Now, Chapter 9 is entitled The Standard Math Curriculum, SMC for short. And what I call the Standard Math Curriculum, which is taught in our public schools today, most of them, has evolved over the 20th century, really had its roots in the 19th century, and right up until today it's been evolving. And it essentially consists of the following. Math education in our high schools today has been compartmentalized into several one-year courses. Algebra 1, freshman year, geometry, sophomore year, algebra 2, maybe it's called analytical geometry or pre-calculus, trigonometry, calculus. Now these can be arranged in different orders and given somewhat different name, but basically you have one-year courses. Now, most of these courses usually come with a large, expensive book that has evolved over many decades. It's just amazing to me how these books have evolved, and they've been loaded up, first of all, with a lot of premature theoretical materials. That's thanks to our mathematicians. And then they also have a lot of obsolete manual algorithms that were once very relevant and useful and necessary that are now obsolete. Now, of course, this does vary from book to book, but if a book in any one of these individual subjects is over 50 pages long, then I suspect it's very true, what I'm telling you. And, of course, the question is, how much do all these books cost? Usually, they're quite expensive. Now, you may be skeptical about what I'm saying, so I want to give you something to compare it to. I want you to go and look at Dr. George Simmons' book. He was one of the great math teachers of the 20th century. He wrote the best book on differential equations I've ever read, the best book on calculus I've ever read, and a wonderful book on topology and modern analysis, which is the advanced math taught for physicists. Okay, and that's the book I met him with. I used to teach out of that book when I was a professor. Okay, this book is called Pre-Calculus Mathematics in a Nutshell. Geometry, algebra, trigonometry. Now, it's 119 pages long, and it costs about $15. Well, I guess you can see no one's promoting it, and I don't know of any school that's ever used it. I use it extensively. This book was written in 1987, and I've got another story I've told you elsewhere about how I used it with one of my children, and he won a scholarship to a fine engineering school in the 8th grade thanks to this book. Well, I will tell you this. If a high school graduate knows all of the math that's in this 119-page book, I would be impressed. So would most college teachers. Just check it out. You need to buy a copy of this book if you're interested in high school math at all. Now, I don't use this book in tiers 1 and 2. There is no textbook for 1 and 2 tiers. I've explained that in other chapters in this you can go look into, what I call workforce math. But I do use this book in tiers 3 and 4, which is, by the way, tier 4 is where I'm getting students ready for STEM. This is really a very advanced pre-calculus math, way beyond what I've done in tiers 1 and 2. And then I do add, in tier 4, I do add some materials that are not in George's book. George Simmons was his name. Complex numbers I add, which is extremely important in this 21st century and can easily be taught in high school now and should be. But the big thing is I add Wolfram Alpha. I start using Wolfram Alpha, and I start using it with George Simmons' book, and then I use it with a lot of custom notes. Now, Wolfram Alpha, and I've talked about this in other chapters, is the modern tool that revolutionizes STEM math. And I discussed this, I believe, extensively in Chapter 6. In Chapter 2, I have taught you that I believe all students should first be taught the concepts of algebra, geometry, and trig, the basic concepts along with how to use the scientific calculator, which is the first modern tool that we need to teach them with. I use the TI-30XA. It's about a $10 calculator if you go buy it at someplace like Walmart, or you can get it at Amazon. Now, I do give people a one-question test that I have to find out if a student has learned what I call basic practical math, algebra, geometry, and trig, and it's a simple question. Calculate the area of an arbitrary triangle given the lengths of the sides, and that's all you're given if using a scientific calculator. And once a student has completed my basic tiers 1 and 2, they can do that. And that's something that you ought to, it's a great, I discussed this back in earlier chapters, and it's a great problem that you can use to have a lot of fun with and win a lot of bets with. Now, once a student has completed tiers 1 and 2, and what I call quantitative reasoning, and maybe consumer math too, then they're ready for the military, an apprentice program, or a tech school. And this usually only takes about a year to do this. So this is how I start all students off. And students that normally are afraid of math, they don't like math, they don't know what it's good for, this changes their attitude completely. And I talk about that in other chapters and why that is. It has to do with psychology and so on. So the first question I would ask your public school is, do you do this? Now, to my knowledge, very few do. And if you find one that does, congratulations. I think that's a wonderful thing, and I'm very complimentary if you find a school that can do that. Remember, this is all in 1 year. And you need to read some of the previous chapters if you don't understand this. I do recommend, in fact, that any parent or teacher read in Dr. Simmons' book, the pre-calculus book, the nutshell book, read the preface, Dr. Simmons' preface, and read the introductions to his 3 chapters, algebra, geometry, and trigonometry. Just read those. Even if you don't want to learn the math, just read what he says, because this pretty much explains what's wrong with the standard math curriculum most of our schools are using today. Algebra and geometry really need to be taught together. And sometimes that happens if a school is teaching what's called analytical geometry by, say, the 11th grade, but most students never make it that far. They get discouraged. They quit long before then. And then they're not ready for the military and apprentice programs in the workforce. It's just horrible. This is usually what happens when you're getting students ready for STEM. Now, I do this too, of course, in Tier 4 for STEM students, but this is not for most students. Most students are going to be finished with math either after Tier 2 if they're not going to go to college, and if they are going to go to college, then we teach them another year of math to get them ready for the SAT and the ACTs. This is college-bound students now that are not interested in STEM, and that doesn't take that much more math. What it really takes is getting ready students know how to take these doggone time tests. Well, anyway, I would ask your school, what are you doing to get students ready for the SAT and the ACT if they're not interested in STEM, but they're college bound? And by the way, getting through Tier 3 for most students, homeschool students or any student, is about 2 years, starting for Tiers 1 and 2 and then Tier 3. So if you get ready, you get a student ready for college in 2 years. Now, we also want to teach them some consumer math, which helps them out. And we also teach them some quantitative reasoning if they're going into the workforce. Okay, but all of this takes a couple of years is all. Now, if you have students that are interested in science and technology and engineering and math, STEM, then what are you doing? Now, here's a big question I'm going to ask. Are you teaching the obsolete manual tools for algebra and analytical geometry and calculus and trigonometry? Or are you teaching a modern 21st century tool like Wolfram Alpha, which is free, of course? It's a wonderful tool. It's amazing. It's been around since 2009. It's a 21st century tool. If you're not teaching that, then as far as I'm concerned, your curriculum is obsolete. It's not doing the job. Now, even if your school is trying to update and use modern technologies like Chromebooks, which a lot of schools are doing, and some online learning, it isn't going to help very much if you're not teaching the right math topics and teaching them in the right order. So what I would examine in any school is, are they using appropriate form of spike pedagogy, which I explained in Chapter 1? And if they are trying to do it, are they using all 5 of the ingredients properly? It's very hard to do spike pedagogy if you don't do it, and to do it properly. It's expensive. I mean, we spent a lot of money developing our program and our ability to deliver it with Spike technology, the pedagogy. This is a multi-million-dollar process, and most schools can't do that. Now, I would certainly examine the books they're using, and if they're using large, expensive books, that's a huge red flag. Right away, that tells me they're doing what I call the standard math curriculum, which is obsolete and really very difficult for our students. Unfortunately, that's what a lot of our states are mandating. They say, oh, here's the books you can use. Find me a state that would allow a school to use George Simmons' $15 book. Oh boy, and if you find one, let me know. I would love to know. I think that would be fantastic if they did. Well, one of the things you can do, if you want to compare what the school's doing, is take the syllabi for our 6-tier program. You've got available to you other places. Here it is. I've given it to you in previous chapters, and it's on our website. It's free for you to go look at, and you can see what we do, the order we do it in, and all that through the through what we've given you, and compare the syllabi for your skills math program. Now, your school should give you a syllabi. If a school won't give me a syllabi, I'll say, well, tell me what you're teaching. Well, here's the books we're using. Well, tell me, what are you teaching these books? You got a 400-page algebra book, a 300-page algebra book. What are you teaching out of it? Because I know you're not teaching all of it. You can't. So what are you doing? Now, I want to tell you, I'm not criticizing math teachers. I'm not criticizing high school math teachers. They're victims. I think they're victims just as much as our students are. They were put through the same system, and they were taught, this is how you teach math. This is what you teach. That's what our math educators have been teaching them. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to teach what you've been told to teach, what you're in the books you're given. In fact, I don't even blame the administrators of our schools or even the school boards. Quite frankly, they're victims of the state standards, and these tend to be set by our so-called math education leaders. You're talking about Common Core and all of that sort of thing. Well, the facts are, very unfortunately, very sad, our current standard math curriculum is actually the result of what I would call an evolutionary process. It's been developing over the last 100 to 200 years, and it's just been accumulating all sorts of baggage. It's got theoretical topics that are very premature for most students, like who needs to know what an irrational number is? How are you going to use that? Only a theoretical mathematician cares about it. Is the square root of 12.1 rational or irrational? That's in a first-year algebra book I saw recently. So our math curriculum today is not a product of what I would call intelligent design, where you use modern technologies and you ask yourself, what does a modern math student need to know? Maybe you'll pardon the analogy to evolutionary to intelligent design, but the bottom line is I've been watching all of this for 65 years. I'm 80 years old. I was, quote, a victim, and I taught math in our public schools. I studied math in our public schools, and quite frankly, I was disgusted by it for reasons that I've talked about in other places. Just go back and read the prefix of this book. Now, in the next chapter 10, I'm going to specifically talk why it's ruining our school. To this chapter, I want to just define what's the standard math curriculum. But it is ruining our public schools. So sad. And I'm hoping that the homeschool community can lead the way to a revolution in our public school math curriculum and delivery systems. Because in a nutshell, as George Simmons might say, just compare our 6-tier syllabi to your public school syllabi, and compare their delivery system and their pedagogy to our Spike online delivery system and pedagogy. Just compare those two things. And if you do that, then you're going to know what the standard math curriculum is that your school is using. They vary a little bit from school to school, but not very much. Maybe from state to state, but not very much. Because the global, or let's say the United States math education community, pretty much sets the standard. You've got something called Common Core, and you've got your standardized testing. You've got your textbook companies. That's what I mean by the math education community. It's really a cabal, I would say, of textbook companies, standard test companies, the math educators, and all of that put together. Now, obviously, this is probably controversial, but in this, I just want you to go look at it and see what it is. I've done that, and I've been doing it for years, and that's what I've discovered. And in chapter 10, next chapter, I'm going to tell you why, in my opinion, it's literally ruining our public schools, and for that matter, it's just doing severe harm to most of our students today, and I'll talk about that in the next chapter. But as you know from this book, there is a solution today, thanks to modern technology. That's what this is all about. I'm actually extremely optimistic about our future, and I'll be talking about that also in later chapters. So this is Craig Hain. My students call me Dr. Dell, and I will see you on another video.